All right, get ready to explore because today we're taking a deep dive into 18th century English literature.
Sounds exciting.
You bet it is, especially since you sent over this
Oh,
quiz.
yes, the quiz.
And wow, it covers like everything. Authors, their works, different genres, all those big literary
It's
movements.
pretty comprehensive.
It really is. It's like the ultimate guide to the era.
It's a great way to test your knowledge.
Totally. Think we can ace this quiz by the end of our deep dive.
I'm up for the challenge if you are. Let's see what we remember.
Let's do it. And it looks like the quiz starts off with giant of the period, Dr. Samuel Johnson.
Ah, yes, Johnson. You can't talk about the 18th century without him.
Exactly. He was more than just a writer, too. Poet, critic, that whole lexicographer thing, even a socialite.
He was a man of many talents.
He really was. The quiz doesn't waste any time throwing us into the deep end with him.
And for good reason.
Mm.
He was a major force in the 18th century literary scene. Not just creating works, but shaping tastes, setting the standards.
Like what good writing should be.
Exactly. It's fascinating. Almost like the influencer of his time.
The influencer of the 1700s. I love that.
Right. And speaking of influence, the quiz mentions some of his greatest hits.
The Vanity of Human Wishes. Those Rambler essays.
His groundbreaking dictionary, of course.
Don't forget the Lives of the English Poets.
Each one a masterpiece in its own right.
Talk about a legacy. His dictionary, though, it wasn't just a list of words.
No, it was a commentary on society, culture, even morality.
It's amazing how much weight his words carried back then.
He had a way of cutting through the noise, getting to the heart of things.
The quiz even mentions how he openly criticized Lord Chesterfield's letter.
Oh yes, that was a bold move.
Because back then, those letters were like required reading.
Essential for any aspiring gentleman,
Yeah.
or so they thought.
But Johnson wasn't afraid to challenge that.
It shows his independent spirit, his willingness to go against the grain.
That's what I call standing up for your beliefs.
He wasn't afraid to ruffle some feathers.
Now, the quiz also mentions some of his maybe lesser-known works.
Rasselas, for instance.
Have you had a chance to explore that one?
Rasselas is a journey, but not a lighthearted one.
Oh.
It explores the pursuit of happiness, but it's far from a fairy tale.
So, no happily ever after.
Not in the traditional sense.
Mhm.
Johnson grapples with some pretty weighty philosophical questions.
Using this story of a prince searching for a fulfilling life.
Exactly. It reflects the anxieties of the 18th century, the search for meaning in a changing world,
So it's more about the deeper
the
questions.
struggles we all face when trying to figure out what truly matters.
Wow, I'm definitely adding that to my reading list. It sounds like Johnson had his finger on the pulse of what it means to be human.
Regardless of the time period, those questions are timeless.
Speaking of connections, the quiz mentions that Johnson had quite the circle of friends.
Oh yes, his circle was a who's who of the 18th century literary world.
And one name that pops up is Oliver Goldsmith.
Ah, Goldsmith.
The quiz describes him as an incorrigible simpleton.
That might give the wrong impression.
Really? Because I have to admit, it sounds kind of endearing.
Well, it's more about his charming naivete, his tendency for mishaps.
Less fool and more lovable goofball.
You could say that. Think of him as the friend who always has a story to tell.
Even if it's about the latest mishap, right?
Exactly. But always with a twinkle in his eye.
Okay, so endearing simpleton it is. And the quiz highlights just how diverse his work was. Essays like The Citizen of the World.
Originally published as Chinese letters, of course.
Right, of course. Then there's the poem The Deserted Village.
The novel The Vicar of Wakefield.
And his famous play, She Stoops to Conquer.
Goldsmith's range is remarkable. He moved effortlessly between genres.
Always with a keen eye for social observation, a touch of humor.
And speaking of She Stoops to Conquer, it's a testament to his comedic genius.
Still performed today.
Absolutely. Centuries later, it still makes audiences laugh. You might have even seen a production yourself.
Wait, really? I had no idea it was still so popular.
It's a classic for a reason.
All right, quiz. You've officially got me curious about Goldsmith.
He's certainly a figure worth exploring.
Shall we move on to the next literary landmark?
Lead the way.
Okay, from the lighthearted world of Goldsmith, the quiz takes us to a more contemplative space.
Thomas Gray's Elegy, written in a country churchyard.
Ah, yes. The poem that ponders mortality and the lives of everyday people.
A bit heavier than Goldsmith's misadventures.
But a classic nonetheless. What makes this poem so special?
Gray captures a sense of melancholy, but also a quiet celebration of ordinary lives.
It's like he's finding beauty in the simple things, even in the face of death.
Exactly. And it foreshadows the Romantic movement, exploring themes of nature, emotion, individual experience.
So we're seeing those seeds of change being sown, even in this seemingly traditional poem,
It's a bridge between the old and the new.
like a sneak peek at what's to come in the literary world.
And that's what makes this period so fascinating. It's a time of transition, where different styles and influences are coming together.
Creating a dynamic, unpredictable literary landscape.
Exactly. Buckle up, because things are about to get even more interesting.
Oh, I'm ready for the ride. What other literary adventures await us?
Well, the quiz points to a major development in the 18th century,
What's that?
the rise of the novel.
The novel. Who knew this was when it all began?
It's a pivotal moment in literary history, and the quiz highlights two pioneers, Samuel Richardson and Henry Fielding.
Okay, I'm all ears. What made their contributions so significant?
Richardson, with novels like Pamela and Clarissa Harlowe, mastered the epistolary form,
Epistolary form.
told through letters. He draws readers into the intimate world of his characters through their correspondence.
So we're getting a glimpse into their inner lives, their most private thoughts.
Precisely. He tapped into a growing fascination with individual experiences and emotions.
Especially those of women, it seems.
It was a revolutionary approach to storytelling.
And it clearly resonated with readers. What about Fielding? How did his approach differ?
Fielding, with Tom Jones, created what he called a comic epic poem in prose.
Comic epic poem in prose. That's quite a mouthful.
It is, isn't it? He took a more panoramic view, exploring society, class, morality.
Through this sprawling, often satirical narrative.
He wanted to capture the complexities of life in all its messy glory.
So we've got Richardson diving deep into emotions through intimate letters, and Fielding taking us on this grand satirical adventure.
Both pushing boundaries, experimenting with new ways to tell stories.
And it seems like their relationship wasn't all sunshine and roses.
Oh, not at all. There was a bit of rivalry there, you could say.
Well, a little literary feud, do tell.
Well, Fielding started his career in theater.
Really? I didn't know that.
His plays were known for their sharp wit and satirical edge.
But something got in the way of his theatrical ambitions.
You could say that. The Licensing Act of 1737 imposed strict censorship on plays.
So anything deemed controversial could be banned.
Exactly. And Fielding's work often pushed those boundaries.
So the novel became his way to circumvent those restrictions.
His way to express himself more freely, without the censors breathing down his neck.
That's brilliant. And it all started with a parody, right?
His first foray into fiction was a satirical take on Richardson's Pamela.
He called it Schemmel, didn't he?
Indeed. He poked fun at what he saw as the novel's overly sentimental tone.
Oh, I love a good literary jab. It seems like the 18th century literary world was full of personality clashes.
It was just as lively and full of drama as any other.
So it wasn't all polite tea parties and book readings.
Not by a long shot. But while these more realistic narratives were developing, something darker was brewing in the literary landscape.
You're talking about those deliciously spooky Gothic novels, right?
You know it. The quiz mentions Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto.
And Anne Radcliffe's The Mysteries of Udolpho.
Tales filled with crumbling castles, shadowy secrets, and that delicious sense of terror.
It seems those 18th century readers had a taste for the macabre.
Absolutely. These novels tapped into a fascination with the darker side of human nature.
The allure of the unknown, the thrill of a good scare.
It's a genre that still captivates us today.
Proving that our love for spooky stories is timeless.
Indeed. But what's particularly interesting is how the Gothic novel contrasted with the more rational ideals of the Enlightenment.
So it's like a rebellion against reason.
The way to explore those irrational fears and desires that lurk beneath the surface.
It makes you wonder what cultural anxieties were feeding into these trends.
That's a question worth pondering. But before we get too lost in the shadowy world of Gothic fiction,
We should take a step back.
consider the broader literary landscape of the 18th century.
Sounds like a plan. What other literary treasures await us on this quiz-guided adventure?
Let's find out. You know, it's really striking how the 18th century wrestled with this tension between reason and emotion.
Like logic versus imagination.
Exactly. And it seems like the novel, this new form, really became a space for writers to grapple with those different impulses.
You're right. The novel really was this perfect canvas for social commentary and also like deep introspection.
Right. And the quiz keeps reminding us that Samuel Richardson, with his mastery of the epistolary novel, really helped shape this landscape.
Right. We talk about Pamela and Clarissa, those novels told through letters, and it's just such a cool way to experience a story.
It really is. You feel like you're peeking into someone's private correspondence.
Oh, personal, right.
And what Richardson does so well is he captures those nuances of relationships, the inner turmoil.
All those hopes and fears laid bare in those letters.
It's no wonder that even Dr. Johnson, with his critical eye, was a fan.
Oh, wow. So even the big man himself was moved by those intimate stories.
He was. But the quiz also mentions other novelists who were making their mark.
Oh, like Tobias Smollett, for example.
Smollett. His first novel, Roderick Random, comes in with a very different energy.
Oh.
It's full of adventure. He embraces this style called picaresque, which follows like a roguish, often witty hero on all these adventures.
So lots of colorful characters, daring escapades.
Oh, tons. Of course, plenty of social satire.
It sounds like a wild ride.
It really is. And then his later works, like Humphrey Clinker or Sir Lancelot Greaves, follow a similar vein.
So we've got Smollett creating these larger-than-life characters.
Navigating the absurdities of society with wit and a little bit of mischief.
I like it. So we have Richardson exploring those depths of human emotion through letters, and then Smollett taking us on these rollicking adventures.
With social commentary woven in.
What other voices were shaping the novel back then?
Well, the quiz brings up Lawrence Sterne, a writer who really pushed the boundaries of what a novel could be.
Oh, in what way?
His masterpiece, Tristram Shandy, is, well, some people consider it the first Impressionist novel in English.
Impressionist novel. Okay, I'm intrigued. What's so different about it?
Imagine a novel that's not so much about a straight plot,
Okay.
but more about this journey through the narrator's mind. Tristram Shandy is full of, like digressions, wordplay, stream of consciousness.
It's like he's throwing out the rule book.
In a way, yes. Sterne was a master of experimentation, challenging those conventions.
And really delighting in the unexpected.
He was a true innovator, that's for sure.
It's amazing to see how the novel was evolving, taking on all these different forms.
Finding its voice, so to speak.
And speaking of voices, the quiz brings us back to Henry Fielding.
Fielding. We can't forget about him.
The quiz reminds us that he started in the world of theater.
Right. His plays, like Love in Several Masks, were known for their wit.
And his wildly popular Tom Thumb.
Oh, yes. That one really made a splash.
So he was already, making waves before turning to the novel.
He was, but then, well, the Licensing Act of 1737 sort of got in the way.
The Licensing Act? What was that about?
Essentially, it clamped down on theatrical productions. Censorship,
Anything controversial could be banned.
Pretty much. And Fielding, with his satirical edge, well, let's just say he wasn't exactly playing it safe.
So the novel became his outlet.
Exactly. A way to sidestep those restrictions, express himself more freely.
That's so clever. And his first novel, it was a parody of Richardson's work, right?
You got it. Shyamala. He turned the original story on its head, poked fun at the sentimental tone.
Oh, those literary rivalries. Gotta love them.
They make things interesting, that's for sure.
So it wasn't all just polite literary discussions back then.
Not at all. They had their share of drama, too.
But Fielding didn't just do parody.
No, he went on to create some truly groundbreaking novels. Jonathan Wild, for instance, is a biting satire.
And of course his masterpiece, Tom Jones.
Yes, the comic epic poem in prose. Fielding really wanted to blend those different forms, create something entirely new.
And he did. With Tom Jones, he really cemented his reputation as this master of realism.
He presented characters with flaws, put them in complex situations.
And he explored those social realities of 18th century England.
With wit and intelligence and this keen eye for human nature.
It sounds like he was a real trailblazer, paving the way for all those realistic novels that would come later.
Absolutely. Fielding's legacy is undeniable. But while he and Richardson were making their mark on the novel, other literary forms were also flourishing.
Reflecting all those intellectual and cultural shifts of the era.
Right, because it wasn't just about novels. The 18th century was bursting with creativity.
This deep dive is really turning into quite the adventure.
Isn't it? There's so much to explore.
So what other literary landscapes should we check out?
Well, let's see what else our trusty quiz has in store for us.
It's amazing how much we've already covered.
I know, right? From Johnson's wit to Fielding's social commentary, this quiz is really giving us a tour of the 18th century.
It really is. And it's not over yet.
Not even close.
Yeah.
There are still so many fascinating figures to discover.
Well, let's not waste any time. What else does our trusty quiz have in store for us?
Well, it introduces us to Fanny Burney, for example.
Oh, I've heard of her. Wasn't she one of the first women to really make it as a novelist?
You're absolutely right. Her debut novel, Evelina, was a huge success. It's a coming-of-age story about a young woman navigating society.
With all those, like, social codes and romantic
Oh,
entanglements?
plenty of those. And of course, the pressure to find a suitable husband.
A timeless theme, it seems.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
But Burney's novels weren't just romantic fluff.
Right. She was known for her sharp observations about women's lives.
She offered this witty and insightful critique of social norms.
All while telling engaging stories that kept readers hooked.
Exactly. She was a master of her craft.
It's so inspiring to see women like her breaking into the literary world, you know.
Using their voices to challenge conventions.
Absolutely. So who else is on our list of literary trailblazers?
Well, the quiz mentions Henry Mackenzie, whose novel The Man of Feeling really embraced a different kind of sensibility.
Different how?
As the title suggests, it celebrates empathy, compassion, human connection.
Ah, so it's a bit of a tearjerker.
You could say that. Sentimentality was a huge literary trend in the 18th century.
It's like a counterpoint to all that emphasis on reason and rationality during the Enlightenment.
Right, like a pendulum swinging between head and heart.
It makes you wonder what was going on culturally, you know, what anxieties were fueling those trends.
That's a great point. The historical and social context always plays a role in shaping literature.
It's all connected.
Exactly. Now, before we wrap up our deep dive,
Yes, we should probably start winding down.
the quiz reminds us of one more genre that really captured readers' imaginations.
Let me guess. Gothic novels.
You got it. We talked about Walpole and Radcliffe,
Those spooky tales of castles and secrets.
but there were even more chills to be had. The quiz singles out The Monk by Matthew Lewis.
Okay, I've heard of that one.
It's considered one of the most gruesome Gothic novels of the era.
Gruesome, huh? Sounds intense.
It is. But it speaks to that fascination with the darker side of human nature.
The things that, you know, make us shiver.
And let's be honest, we haven't lost that fascination.
No, not at all. We still love our horror movies or ghost stories.
It's a timeless appeal.
It really is. Well, this quiz has taken us on a whirlwind tour of 18th century English literature.
It has. We've covered so much ground.
Johnson's wit, Goldsmith's misadventures, the rise of the novel, even those spooky Gothic tales.
It's been a real adventure.
It has. And the best part is, this is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore.
Absolutely. This era is rich with literary treasures just waiting to be discovered.
Well said. And for you, our listener, we have a little challenge.
Ooh, what's that?
Imagine hosting your own 18th century literary salon. Who would you invite? Johnson, with all his knowledge.
Ooh, good choice. Or maybe Goldsmith with his charming stories.
Or perhaps Anne Radcliffe to add a touch of mystery to the gathering.
What a wonderful way to engage with this period.
To imagine yourself in conversation with these brilliant minds, debating, sharing stories.
Maybe even indulging in a little friendly rivalry,
Ah,
just like in the real 18th century literary world.
that's a great point. And on that note, we'll bid you farewell for now.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into 18th century English literature.
Until next time, happy reading.